I've recently been contacted by a new crime channel called The Crime Reel, and the narrator asked me if I would give him a bit of a shout out. So I waited until the first few videos were up, and I've seen them all, and I must say, I do think that the channel is really good. So if you'd all like a few more crime videos, slightly different to the format that I put on my channel, it'd be really good if you go and see The Crime Reel. I've left a link here for you all to click on, and I'll also leave one at the end. Today, we are going to look at a case from the early 20th century. So sit back as we go to the USA. Eva Coo was born on the 17th of June, 1889, in the small Canadian town of Haleburton in Ontario. She was born Eva Curry, and when she was around 13 years old, her family moved to Toronto. Eva liked Toronto. The city was growing and had a population of over 200,000. So Eva's life suddenly became very different to the more rural upbringing she had experienced in Haleburton. While she was still in her teens, she met a rail worker named William Coo. They met up whenever they could, and they eventually decided to run away together. So without telling any friends or family, they got married. The marriage, however, was not very successful, and a few years later they broke up. Eva wanted to have a new start in her life, so in 1921 she left Canada and travelled to upstate New York, where she settled in the small city of Oneonta. She opened her own cafe bar and called it Little Eva's Place. This was during Prohibition, but despite this, the business prospered. Oneonta was small, but it was busy. It was a beautiful city situated halfway between Albany and Binghamton, and many people would stop there. Eva was also a very friendly and outgoing proprietor, and soon became popular with her customers. And as time passed, Little Eva's Place became very well known, especially with truck drivers and rail workers. As Eva's business thrived, she took on more staff. One was a local man named Harry Wright. He had a small farm but spent most of his time drinking. Eva employed him as a handyman, but she did not pay him very much, as he often stayed in the bar, drinking after his work had finished. He was also known to get drunk and then attempt to walk back to his farm along the highway. He would then sometimes fall asleep by the road, and eventually, when someone found him, he would be returned to Little Eva's Place. In 1933, Eva's business started to suffer. Prohibition had ended, and the Great Depression had seen unemployment in America rise to unprecedented levels. Many people who stayed in work had their pay reduced, and for the first time since opening her business, Eva started experiencing a large decrease in her income. Then in 1934, the passenger service on the D&H railway line between Cooperstown and Colliersville was discontinued. This saw the business decline even further. At the same time, a young 27-year-old from Pennsylvania named Martha Clift started working for her. Everyone seemed to like Martha, and Eva was especially pleased with the way she handled customers. It soon became apparent to everyone that Martha had become somewhat of a favourite of Eva. On June the 14th, 1934, the Oneonta Police Department received a phone call. The phone call seemed to be from a very worried lady, and when the officer asked the lady her name, she replied, "It's Eva Coo." She told the officer that her handyman Harry Wright had gone missing. He had been sent to run an errand, but he hadn't returned, and as she knew that he frequently got drunk, she wanted to know if the police had seen him. The officer dispatched one of his men to visit Eva to get more information about Harry Wright. The police assured her that they would keep their eyes open and would update her if they got any news on her handyman's whereabouts. Shortly afterwards, and only a few hundred yards from Little Eva's, Harry Wright was found. He was lying by the side of the road, and it seemed that he had been hit by a car. He was dead. The police initially thought that this was a simple case of a hit and run. A drunken pedestrian walking along the road and getting hit by a vehicle, and for whatever reason, the driver failed to stop. The body was taken to the doctor in order to produce a death certificate. The doctor started the examination and very quickly realised that the deceased had indeed been hit by a vehicle, but the injuries were not entirely consistent with this type of incident. The doctor had also noticed that the deceased had a head injury, which in his opinion had been caused by being hit with a heavy object. Eventually, the doctor concluded that the deceased had died at around 8:30 p.m. and had probably been run over twice by a vehicle. This conclusion, however, didn't really fit with the police theory that this was a simple case of a hit and run. The police inspected the location where the body was found, and they were surprised as they could not find any evidence that a vehicle had hit a pedestrian. There were no skid marks on the road or vehicle paint fragments. It was very strange. When further results on the deceased came back, it showed that there was not much alcohol in Harry Wright's body, and the police became even more baffled. Harry had walked that route hundreds of times, and as he was sober, it seemed very unlikely that he would have just stumbled in front of a car. Detectives started to think that there may be more to the death of Harry Wright. They returned to speak to Eva, and she confirmed the direction Harry would have taken and said that it would have taken him about 20 minutes. But the time she said she last saw him to the time the doctor confirmed was a probable time of his death didn't match, and there was a gap of nearly 2 hours. So where had Harry been? The side of the road the body was found also did not fit with Harry having walked to run an errand. Something just did not add up, so the police decided to investigate the deceased and Eva Coo more closely. They soon discovered that Harry, like many people in the 1930s, had a family burial plot, and his name and date of birth had already been carved onto the tombstone, but the date of Harry's birth had recently been changed to make him out to be 5 years younger than he actually was. This seemed very strange. Around the same time, Eva went to the MetLife insurance company office. She was armed with a life policy which would pay out on the death of Harry Wright, and the named beneficiary in the policy was none other than herself, Eva Coo. The insurance company started to process the claim, but they were aware that the authorities had not concluded their investigation into the death of Harry, so reported the claim to the police. At the same time, police officers were visiting local garages. They had ascertained that any vehicle that had hit Harry would have damage on it and would need repairing. At one local garage, they were told of a woman who had rented a very large car. The garage staff remembered her as she had very little conversation. She just paid and left. When they checked their records, they confirmed that the woman's name was Martha Clift. This was significant for the police, so they ordered an examination of the car, and they found what they thought to be dried blood on the back seats. It was time to look more closely into Martha Clift, and when they did, they discovered that she was also an employee of Eva Coo. The death of Harry Wright was starting to look suspicious, so police scaled up their investigation. A very interesting witness came forward who informed them that on the day in question, Harry Wright had told him that he was going with Eva to an abandoned house on Crumhorn Mountain. He said that Harry had told him that he was going to steal flowers and plants. The witness remembered the day in question very well, as it was the same night that there was a heavyweight world championship boxing fight on the radio. This was a good lead for the police, so they looked further at the abandoned house on Crumhorn Mountain. It was owned by a lady named Mrs. Fink, and when they contacted her, she told them that she went to the house on the day in question and discovered a motor vehicle and 2 women trespassing on her property. The police asked her if she had also seen a man, but she confirmed that she had not. She said that the older of the 2 women apologised and assured her that they were not there to rob or vandalise her property. Mrs. Fink said that the time this all happened was around 9 p.m. The police then started to speak to Eva's staff and neighbours. A neighbour told them that Eva had told her that if asked by the police to tell them that she had never left the bar. The neighbour added that she had no idea of Eva's movements on the day in question. 2 waitresses told police that Eva had never treated Harry very well, and they had heard her threaten to hit him with a wooden mallet. The police decided that they should now arrest both women and bring them in for questioning. While they were at the police station, the officer in charge instructed his men to go to Eva's home and search it. They found dozens of insurance policies, all on people Eva knew well, and in every policy, she was named as the sole beneficiary. More incriminating, perhaps, was that they also found a blood-stained wooden mallet that had been wrapped in an old hat. Witnesses then identified the hat to belong to Harry and the mallet to belong to Eva. When confronted with the evidence, neither woman confessed. The evidence was far more convincing against Eva, as she was the one who would have benefited from the life insurance payment, and she had also had Harry's date of birth changed on his headstone, presumably so the insurance premiums would be lower. The police had also uncovered that Eva had not paid her latest tax bill and was having financial issues. So in order to strengthen the case against Eva, the police offered Martha a deal. They said that they would charge her with second-degree murder, with a recommendation of 20 years in prison, if she testified against Eva. In August 1934, the trial began in Cooperstown, New York, and it lasted for almost 3 weeks. As well as the witnesses and the forensic evidence, Martha proved to be the prosecution's most solid witness. She told the court that Eva had planned everything and asked her to rent a car so they could take Harry Wright on a trip to steal some flowers and plants from the abandoned house on Crumhorn Mountain. They all went in the car, and Eva and Harry got out while Martha waited. They walked about 20 yards, and then as Harry stood examining the plants, Eva took out a wooden mallet and struck him on the head. Martha then drove the car as fast as she could towards him and ran over his body. She added that she then backed up and drove over it again. She then told the court that the plan went wrong when Mrs. Fink arrived to see why they were trespassing on her property. When Mrs. Fink left, they loaded Harry Wright's body onto the back seat of the rented car and drove it to within 100 yards of little Eva's place, where they left it at the side of the road. Martha said that Eva had told her that due to the fact Harry was always walking up and down the road drunk, it would be registered as a death caused by an unknown hit-and-run driver. All the evidence seemed to be pointing to a guilty verdict, but incredibly, Harry Wright's body was exhumed and taken along with the jury and the legal teams to the abandoned house at Crumhorn Mountain, where the prosecution acted out what they believed had happened on the night of the 14th of June 1934. When the jury were eventually sent out, they took just 1 hour to reach a verdict. They found Eva Coo guilty of murder in the first degree, and the judge sentenced her to death. They also found Martha Clift guilty of murder in the second degree, and she was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Martha was taken to serve her sentence at Bedford Reformatory, while Eva was sent to the infamous Sing Sing prison. Eva never admitted her guilt and always proclaimed her innocence, but despite her defence teams making the customary appeals, any attempt to commute her sentence was denied. On June the 27th, 1935, Eva Coo was taken to the electric chair. As she sat in the chair, she turned to her matrons and said, "Goodbye, darlings," before becoming the third woman to be executed at Sing Sing prison in the 20th century. Her family, who still lived in Canada, declined to claim her body, with one sister saying, "She's been dead to us for 17 years. Eva was buried at Sing Sing prison. Martha Clift was apparently paroled after serving 13 years and went on to live a life in obscurity. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As per usual, please leave any comments and feedback you may have, and don't forget to check out the crime reel, and I will see you in the next brief case.